The aluminum can made a soft clink as it dropped into the worn shopping cart, followed by the careful footsteps of someone who had learned to move quietly through a world that preferred not to notice her. It was 6:47 a.m. on a crisp October morning in Kansas City, and most people were still asleep or rushing to work, which made it the perfect time for Dorothy "Dot" Sullivan to make her round. At 75 years old, Dot had developed a system that maximized efficiency while minimizing embarrassment. She started before dawn, when the shadows could hide her shame, and focused on areas where discarded cans and bottles were plentiful, but foot traffic was minimal. The business district downtown, the park near the university, the upscale neighborhoods where people drank expensive sparkling water and craft beer, places where a nickel deposit could add up to survival. Travis Kelce was 3 miles into his morning run when he first saw her. The NFL star had taken a different route that day, deviating from his usual path through his affluent neighborhood to explore the older part of Kansas City, where tree-lined streets gave way to smaller houses and chain-link fences. He was wearing noise-canceling headphones and focusing on his pace when something in his peripheral vision made him slow down, then stop completely. An elderly woman was bent over a dumpster behind a convenience store, reaching deep into the metal container to retrieve what looked like beer cans. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun despite the early hour. Her clothes were clean but worn, a burgundy cardigan that had seen better years, dark pants, careful patches at the knee, and shoes that had been resoled at least twice. What struck Travis wasn't just the scene itself, but the dignity with which she approached it. There was no frantic desperation in her movement, no looking around nervously. She worked methodically, efficiently, like someone who had accepted a difficult reality and chose to face it with grace. Travis pulled out his earbuds and watched for another minute, his heart sinking as the full picture became clear. This wasn't someone making a quick buck on recycling as an environmental gesture. This was survival. The woman, he could see now that she was older than he'd initially thought, her face marked by years of worry and recent hardship, carefully arranged the cans in her shopping cart, organizing them by size and type. She had a system, which meant this wasn't new. She'd been doing this for a while. "Excuse me, ma'am," Travis called out, jogging over slowly so as not to startle her. Dot looked up, and Travis was struck by her eyes, clear blue, intelligent, and carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much change too quickly. There was no shame in her expression, but there was wariness, the caution of someone who had learned that unexpected attention was rarely good news. "Yes?" she said, her voice carrying the faint accent of someone who had been born and raised in Missouri but had spent years teaching proper diction to children. "I'm sorry to bother you," Travis said, suddenly aware of how he must look. Expensive running gear, top-of-the-line sneakers, the obvious health and prosperity that came with professional athletic. Are you okay?" It was a stupid question, and they both knew it. Someone who was okay didn't collect cans at dawn to make ends meet. "I'm fine, thank you," Dot replied, with the automatic politeness of someone who had been raised to never burden others with personal problems. "Just doing a little recycling before it gets busy around here." Travis nodded, but something in her answer, the careful way she avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of either age or stress, made him press gently. "I'm Travis, by the way. Travis Kelce. I play for the Chiefs." "Dorothy Sullivan," she replied, and Travis caught the slight straightening of her shoulders that came with proper introduction. "Though most folks call me Dot. And yes, I know who you are. I've watched you play. You've got good hands." Despite the circumstances, Travis smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Can I ask, how long have you been doing this, the recycling?" For a moment, he thought she might deflect again, but something in his tone, genuine concern rather than pity, seemed to reach her. "About 8 months," she said quietly, "since I lost my house." The words hit Travis like a physical blow. "You lost your house?" Dot nodded, her hands still organizing cans with practiced efficiency. "I was a teacher for 43 years. Elementary school, mostly 3rd and 4th grade, had a nice little pension. A small house my husband left me when he passed 5 years ago. Thought I had everything figured out for my retirement." She paused, looking down at her worn hand. "Turns out, I figured wrong." Travis felt his throat tighten. "What happened?" "Well, That's a long story, Dot said, glancing at her watch. An old Timex that had probably been a gift decades ago. And I've got to get to the other side of town before the morning crowd starts throwing away their coffee cups. Those are worth good money, too. Mrs. Sullivan, Dot, would you let me buy you breakfast? I'd really like to hear that long story, if you're willing to share it. Dot studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was genuine concern or celebrity charity that would disappear as quickly as it had appeared. I don't need charity, young man, she said finally. I'm managing just fine. I can see that, Travis replied. You're one of the most organized recyclers I've ever met, but I wasn't offering charity. I was asking if you'd have breakfast with me, because I'd like to know more about someone who taught kids for 43 years and still gets up before dawn to work. Something in his tone, or maybe just the exhaustion of carrying a heavy burden alone, made Dot's careful composure crack slightly. There's a little diner about 6 blocks from here, she said. They open at 7, and they don't mind if you sit for a while. But I buy my own coffee. Deal, Travis, but I'm buying the pancake. As they walked toward the diner, Dot pushing her cart full of cans, Travis shortening his stride to match her pace, neither of them realized that this chance encounter would set in motion events that would shock the sports world, expose a criminal conspiracy, and prove that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of kindness come from the most ordinary moments of human connection. Dot Sullivan was about to discover that her 43 years of teaching children had prepared her for something she never could have imagined, teaching a professional athlete what it really meant to give back. And Travis Kelce was about to learn that sometimes the greatest victories happen not on football, but in the quiet corners of the world where dignity and desperation intersect, and where one person's willingness to listen changed everything. The aluminum cans in Dot's cart clinked soft as they walked, each one representing not just survival, but the resilience of someone who refused to give up, even when the world had given up on her. But what neither Travis nor Dot knew was that her story of loss and survival was about to become a story of justice and redemption that would capture the attention of millions and put them both in the crosshairs of people who had a lot to lose if the truth came out. The Sunrise Diner was exactly the kind of place that had been serving the same menu for 30 years without apology. Red vinyl booths with duct tape patches, coffee that could strip paint, and waitresses who called everyone honey, regardless of age or gender. At 7:15 a.m., it was half full with the usual crowd of construction workers, early shift nurses, and retirees who had nowhere else to be. Travis and Dot had secured a corner booth, her shopping cart parked beside the table where she could keep an eye on it. Travis had ordered enough food for 3 people: pancakes, eggs, bacon, hash browns, while Dot had asked only for coffee and toast, despite his insistence that she order whatever she wanted. Pride is expensive, she'd said with a small smile, but sometimes it's all you've got left. Now, as steam rose from their coffee cups and the morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, Dot began to tell her story. I started teaching in 1979, she said, her voice taking on the cadence of someone who had spent decades explaining complex things to children. Fresh out of college, full of ideas about changing the world one student at a time. Met my husband Richard that same year. He was a mechanic, good with his hand, better with his heart. Travis listened without interrupting, sensing that this was a story that needed to be told in its own time. We had a good life, not fancy, but comfortable. Richard worked on cars, I taught kids, we saved what we could. When he got sick with cancer 15 years ago, the medical bills ate through our savings, but we managed. The house was paid off, my pension was solid, and after he passed, I thought I'd figured out how to live comfortably on what I had. Dot's hands wrapped around her coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. That's when Marcus Sterling showed up. Something in the way she said the name made Travis pay closer attention. Mr. Sterling was what you'd call a financial advisor, Dot continued, her tone growing more bitter. Came recommended by another teacher who'd used his service. Very professional, very convincing. He said that with interest rates so low, my savings account was actually losing money to inflation. Said he could help me invest my pension and savings to give me a better retirement. Travis felt his stomach tighten, recognizing the setup for a story he'd heard variations of before. I wasn't naive, Dot said defensively, as if reading his thoughts. I asked questions, did research. Mr. Sterling had licenses, references, a nice office. He showed me documents, performance reports, testimonials from other clients. Everything looked legitimate. But she took a sip of coffee, her hands steadier now as she found her rhythm in the telling. He convinced me to move my pension into what he called a diversified growth portfolio. Said it was guaranteed to outperform my old plan by at least 3% annually. The paperwork was complicated, but he walked me through it, explained it. I trusted him. How much did you invest? Travis asked gently. Everything, Dot said simply. My teacher's pension, Richard's life insurance money, the savings we'd built up over 40 years, about $380,000 total. It was everything I had in the world, except the house. Travis closed his eyes briefly, already knowing where this was headed. For the first year, everything looked great. The monthly statements showed steady growth, just like he'd promised. I was getting better returns than I'd ever seen. I even recommended him to 2 other retired teachers from my school. Dot's voice grew quieter. Then the statements stopped coming. When I called his office, the number was disconnected. When I drove there, the building was empty. Marcus Sterling had vanished, and he'd taken the life savings of dozens of retirees with him. Jesus, Travis whispered. The FBI got involved, but it turned out Mr. Sterling wasn't even his real name. The licenses were fake. The references were fake. Even some of the other clients I'd met were part of the scam. It was what they called a Ponzi scheme. He was using new investors' money to pay fake returns to earlier investors, making everyone think their investments were growing. Dot reached into her purse and pulled out a worn newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Financial Advisor Wanted in $12 million Fraud Scheme. 47 victims," she said, pointing to the article. Most of them elderly, most of them people who'd worked their whole life and trusted someone who seemed legitimate. They never caught him. Travis read the article, his anger building with each paragraph. The scope of the fraud was staggering, but what made it worse was the profile of the victim. Teachers, nurses, postal workers, people who had saved modestly but consistently for decades. What about the house? Travis asked. Had to sell it to pay the lawyers and try to recover something, anything, from the mess. Got about $85,000 for a house that Richard and I had put our hearts into 30 years. That money lasted about 6 months after I paid off the legal fees and the debts that had piled up while I was trying to figure out what happened to my pension. Dot gestured around the diner. So here I am, 75 years old, collecting aluminum cans to pay for a room at the Riverside Motel, trying to figure out how to survive on Social Security alone, which is about $200 a month. After rent and medication, I've got maybe $300 left for food and everything else. Travis felt sick. Dot, why didn't you apply for assistance? There are programs. You think I didn't try? She asked, not unkindly. I spent months filling out forms, sitting in waiting room, being told I made just slightly too much to qualify for housing assistance or food stamp. Apparently, if you get Social Security, the government assumes you're fine. She smiled ruefully. Besides, I was a teacher. I taught kids that if you work hard and do the right things, life will work out. Hard to ask for help when you spent 43 years telling children that self-reliance was a virtue. Travis stared down at his untouched pancakes, processing the magnitude of what Dot had been through. A lifetime of service, of doing everything right, destroyed by a criminal who had never been caught. Dot, he said finally, what if I told you I could help? Not just with money, but with finding this Sterling guy. What if we could get your money back? Dot looked at him with the patient expression she'd probably used with students who thought they could solve world hunger with a bake sale. Travis, I appreciate the thought, but the FBI couldn't find it. What makes you think a football player could do better? Because, Travis said, pulling out his phone, football players have resources that the FBI doesn't have. And more importantly, football players have platforms that can turn private investigations into public crusades. As Travis began making calls to his agent, his lawyer, his publicity team, Dot watched with growing amazement. Within 30 minutes, he had connected with a private investigation firm that specialized in financial fraud and a legal team that worked on contingency for fraud victims. Why are you doing this? Dot asked as Travis finished his call. Travis looked at this woman who had dedicated her life to educating children and had been repaid with betrayal and poverty. Because 43 years ago, I had a third-grade teacher named Mrs. Patterson who believed in me when nobody else did. She saw something in a kid from a rough neighborhood and helped me understand that I could be more than my circumstance. He reached across the table and gently took Dot's weathered hands in his. Maybe Marcus Sterling thought he could steal from teachers and nobody would notice or care. Maybe he thought people like you would just disappear quietly. He was wrong. Travis's phone rang and he answered immediately. Yeah, this is Travis Kelce. I need to hire the best fraud investigation team money can buy, and I need them to start today. The target is a man who stole from teachers, and I want him found. As Travis continued coordinating what would become one of the most extensive private fraud investigations in Kansas City's history, Dot sat back in the diner booth and felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 months: hope. What neither of them realized was that Marcus Sterling, whose real name was Marcus Webb, was still in Kansas City, still running scams, and still destroying lives. And when he learned that his crimes had attracted the attention of one of the NFL's biggest stars, he would do whatever it took to protect himself. The hunt for the man who had stolen Dot's life savings was about to become much more dangerous than either of them imagined. Within 48 hours of his breakfast with Dot Sullivan, Travis Kelce had assembled what his agent called the most expensive task force ever created to chase down a con man. The team included Marcus Reed, a former FBI fraud investigator who now ran the region's most successful private investigation firm; Sarah Chen, a forensic accountant who had helped recover millions in stolen funds; and David Park, a cybersecurity expert who specialized in tracking digital financial crime. They met in Travis's Leawood home on a rainy Thursday morning, turning his dining room into a war room complete with whiteboards, laptops, and stacks of documents that Dot had managed to save from her dealings with the fake financial advisor. "Before we start," Travis said, looking around the table at the 3 professionals he was paying $2,000 per day each, "I want you to understand something. This isn't about the money for me. This is about justice for a 75-year-old woman who gave her life to teaching kids and got robbed by a scammer. I want this guy found, and I want every penny returned to every victim." Marcus Reed, a grizzled man in his 50s who had spent 20 years hunting white-collar criminals, spread out a timeline on the mahogany table. "Mr. Kelce, I need to be straight with you. Financial fraud cases like this, especially when the perpetrator has had months to cover his tracks, have about a 15% success rate for full recovery. The money is usually gone, moved through offshore accounts, converted to assets that are hard to trace." "What about finding the guy himself?" Travis asked. "That's more promising," Sarah Chen interjected, opening her laptop. "I've been analyzing the documents Mrs. Sullivan provided, and there are patterns here that suggest this wasn't a one-time operation. The sophistication of the fake licenses, the professional quality of the forged documents, the elaborate office setup, this took significant planning and resource." She turned her screen toward the group, showing a complex flowchart. "Based on the banking information Mrs. Sullivan gave us, the stolen funds were moved through at least 6 different accounts before disappearing. But the routing numbers and timing suggest someone who's done this before, probably multiple times." David Park looked up from his own laptop. "I've been running facial recognition on the photos Mrs. Sullivan took at the investment office. The man she knew as Marcus Sterling appears in 3 other investigations from the past 5 years: Chicago, St. Louis, and Denver. Different names each time, but same basic scam targeting elderly victims." Travis felt his jaw clench. "So this guy is a serial predator." "Exactly," Reed confirmed. "And that's actually good news for us. Serial criminals develop patterns, preferences, comfort zone. They make mistakes because they get overconfident." "What kind of mistake?" Travis asked. Park turned his laptop around, showing a series of real estate transactions. "Each time he runs a scam, he buys property in the area before disappearing. Always high-end, always cash purchases, always through shell company. It's how he launders the money. Convert cash to real estate, then sell the property later for clean money." "Have you found property purchases in Kansas City that match his pattern?" "3 possibilities," Chen said, consulting her notes. "A $750,000 condo downtown, a $1.2 million house in Mission Hills, and a $900,000 investment property in Overland Park. All purchased with cash in the month after Mrs. Sullivan's money disappeared." Reed leaned forward. "Here's where it gets interesting. The Mission Hills property is still occupied. The owner of record is something called Midwest Investment Holdings LLC, which is registered to a P.O. box that doesn't exist. Travis stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked his manicured backyard. So he's still here, still in Kansas City. It gets better, Park said, with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a puzzle. I've been monitoring utility records, credit card transactions, cell phone data, all the digital breadcrumbs people leave behind. 2 days ago, someone matching Sterling's description was seen at a high-end car dealership in Leawood, paying cash for a $85,000 BMW. The dealership has security camera, Chen added, and they kept copies of the identification he provided for the purchase. Travis turned back to the group, his expression hard. So we can find him. We can find him, Reed confirmed. But Mr. Kelce, you need to understand what we're dealing with. This isn't just some small-time scammer. The scope of what we're uncovering suggests this is someone with serious criminal connection, possibly organized crime tied. When we move on him, he's going to fight back. What kind of fight back? Legal challenges, intimidation tactics, possibly worse. Men who steal millions of dollars don't usually go quietly. Travis thought about Dot Sullivan, sleeping in a motel room and collecting cans to afford food, while the man who had destroyed her life was driving around Kansas City in a car that cost more than she'd made in 2 years of teaching. I don't care what kind of fight he puts up, Travis said firmly. We're going to get him. See, what Travis didn't know was that Marcus Sterling, whose real name was actually Marcus Volkov, and who had connections to an Eastern European crime syndicate, had already learned about the investigation. His network of contacts in the financial world had alerted him that someone with serious resources was asking questions about his Kansas City operation, and Marcus Volkov was not someone who left loose ends untied. That afternoon, as Travis was meeting with his investigation team, Dot Sullivan was making her usual rounds through downtown Kansas City when she noticed the black sedan that seemed to be following her. At first, she thought it was her imagination. What would anyone want with a 75-year-old woman collecting aluminum cans? But after 3 blocks, with the car maintaining the same distance behind her, Dot began to feel genuinely frightened. She ducked into a busy coffee shop and watched through the window as the sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows making it impossible to see who was inside. Dot pulled out the cell phone Travis had bought her the day before. For emergency, he'd said, and called the number he'd programmed into it. Travis, I think someone is following me. The response was immediate. Where are you right now? Morrison's Coffee on Main Street, downtown. There's been a black car behind me for the past 20 minutes. Stay exactly where you are. Don't leave the coffee shop. I'm sending someone to get you right now. Within 15 minutes, Marcus Reed arrived at the coffee shop with 2 associates who looked like they'd stepped out of an action movie. They escorted Dot to Reed's SUV while keeping careful watch on the black sedan, which pulled away as soon as they emerged from the coffee shop. Mrs. Sullivan, Reed said as they drove toward Travis's house. It appears our investigation has attracted some unwanted attention. We're going to need to make some changes to ensure your safety. That evening, in Travis's living room, the team briefed both Travis and Dot on what they'd discovered. The good news, Chen said, is that we've confirmed Marcus Sterling's real identity and current location. His name is Marcus Volkov. He's originally from New Jersey, and he's been running financial scams for at least 15 years. The bad news, Reed continued, is that he's not working alone. Our sources indicate he's connected to a criminal organization that specializes in elderly fraud. They've stolen an estimated $50 million from victims across the Midwest over the past decade. Travis looked at Dot, who was sitting quietly in his leather armchair, processing the magnitude of what she'd stumbled into. Dot, I want you to stay here for a while, Travis said. At least until we figure out how dangerous this situation is going to get. I can't impose on you like that, Dot protested. You're not imposing. You're accepting protection from someone who cares about your safety. Reed cleared his throat. There's something else. We've identified 17 other victims in Kansas City alone, and based on the pattern of Volkov's activity, we think he's planning to disappear again very soon. If we're going to get him, we need to move fast. How fast? Travis asked. This weekend, we set up a sting operation, get him on tape admitting to the fraud, and call in federal authorities to make the arrest. Park looked up from his laptop. There's just one problem. To make the sting work, We need bait. Someone he'd be willing to meet with. Someone he'd see as a potential new victim. The room fell silent as everyone realized what he was suggesting. Absolutely not, Travis said immediately. We're not putting Dot in danger. Actually, Dot said quietly, I think we should consider it. Everyone turned to look at her. This man has destroyed dozens of lives. He's stolen money from people who worked their entire lives and trusted him with their future. If I can help catch him, if I can help get justice for all those families, she looked directly at Travis. Wouldn't that be worth the risk? Travis stared at this 75-year-old woman who had already lost everything and was now volunteering to put herself in danger to help others. Dot, you don't understand what we're asking. This isn't just about confronting a con man. This is about going up against a criminal organization that has already shown they're willing to intimidate you. I understand perfectly, Dot replied with the firm tone she'd probably used with misbehaving students for 4 decades. I also understand that if we don't stop him, he's going to keep destroying lives. How many more retirees are going to lose their savings while we worry about my safety? As the team debated the risks and logistics of using Dot as bait in a sting operation, none of them realized that Marcus Volkov was already planning his exit from Kansas City. But first, he intended to eliminate the threat posed by the investigation that Travis Kelce started. The con man, who had built his career on exploiting the trust of elderly victims, was about to discover that some people refuse to be victims. Some investigations, once started, don't stop until justice is served. The next 48 hours would determine whether Dot Sullivan got her life savings back or whether she would pay the ultimate price for seeking justice. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Dot Sullivan would pose as a wealthy widow looking to invest her late husband's life insurance money. The meeting would take place at a high-end restaurant, where Marcus Volkov would feel comfortable, but where Travis's security team could maintain surveillance. I don't like this, Travis said, as they sat in Reed's surveillance van outside the Marriott downtown. Too many things can go wrong. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to get justice, Reed replied, adjusting the monitoring equipment that would track Dot's conversation with Volkov. Inside the hotel restaurant, Dot sat at a corner table wearing a wire and clothes expensive enough to suggest affluence, a navy blue dress that Travis had insisted on buying for her. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a well-to-do widow considering investment options. Marcus Volkov arrived precisely on time. From their van, Travis watched through binoculars as the man who had destroyed Dot's life approached her table. Volkov was younger than expected, maybe late 40s, with polished appearance and the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. Audio check, Reed said into his headset. Dot's voice came through clearly. Mr. Sterling, thank you for meeting with me. Not at all, Mrs. Patterson, Volkov replied, using the fake name Dot had given. I understand you're looking for investment guidance following your husband's passing. For 30 minutes, they listened as Volkov went through his standard routine. Expressions of sympathy, questions about her financial situation, gentle probing to determine how much money was available to steal. My late husband left me with approximately $800,000 in life insurance proceeds, Dot was saying. I'm concerned about inflation if I just leave it in savings account. Very wise thinking, Volkov replied. With my diversified portfolio strategy, I've helped clients achieve returns of 12 to 15% annually. Travis had heard enough. This was exactly the same pitch Volkov had used to steal Dot's real money 8 months earlier. We've got what we need, Reed said. Mrs. Sullivan, begin the conclusion sequence. But then, Dot did something that wasn't part of the plan. Let me just say, Mr. Sterling, that this decision is very important to me. I trusted someone with my investments once before and was scammed, she said clearly. A man who called himself a financial advisor took my entire life savings and disappeared, just like you did 8 months ago. The color drained from Volkov's face. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm Dorothy Sullivan, Dot said, removing the wire and placing it on the table. You stole $380,000 from me. You destroyed my life. And now you're under arrest. Travis was already moving, bursting through the restaurant doors with his security team. Federal agents positioned throughout the restaurant revealed themselves, converging on Volkov's table. You have no proof of anything, Volkov said, backing toward the rear exit. I've never seen this woman before. Actually, we have plenty of proof, Travis said, as FBI agents surrounded Volkov, including recordings of you using the exact same pitch to scam her that you just used again. Special Agent Lisa Martinez stepped forward with handcuffs. Marcus Volkov, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. As federal agents led Volkov away, he turned back with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've started. This is bigger than just me, and there are people who won't appreciate this attention. 3 hours later, in a federal courthouse, Travis and Dot sat with prosecutors as they outlined what they'd uncovered. Mr. Volkov was part of a much larger operation. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Rodriguez explained, "We're looking at a criminal enterprise that has defrauded elderly victims of an estimated $73 million over 8 years. How much money can be recovered?" Travis asked. "We've frozen 17 bank accounts, seized 4 properties, and recovered approximately $12 million, Rodriguez replied. "Mrs. Sullivan, we expect to recover approximately $290,000 of your original investment." Dot stared at the documents, hands trembling. "I'm going to get my money back?" "Most of it, yes, and we're going to make sure Mr. Volkov never does this to anyone else." That evening, back at Travis's house, Dot processed everything that had happened. "I keep thinking about all those other victims," she said. "At least now they'll get some of their money back, too." "Because of you," Travis pointed out. "If you hadn't been brave enough to go through with that sting operation, Volkov would still be out there." "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you get your life back," Travis said. But he was already thinking bigger. "Dot, what if we didn't stop here? What if we used what we've learned to help other people who've been scammed?" "What exactly are you thinking?" "A foundation, not just to help fraud victims recover their money, but to educate elderly people about scams before they happen." Travis pulled out a file. "There's something else." Marcus Volkov wasn't targeting random elderly victims. He was specifically going after retired teachers, nurses, and public service workers. He was exploiting the very qualities that made you good at your job. Over the next 48 hours, Travis worked with his legal team to establish the Dorothy Sullivan Foundation for Elder Financial Protection. The foundation's mission was threefold: education, investigation, and recovery. But the first test came sooner than expected. 3 days after Volkov's arrest, Reed called with disturbing news. "Someone firebombed the Kansas City field office where we were storing evidence for the Volkov case," he said. "No injuries, but they destroyed significant physical evidence." That evening, as they watched news coverage of the firebombing, both understood their fight had become more dangerous. "They're trying to intimidate us," Dot said calmly. "Are you scared?" Travis asked. "Terrified," Dot admitted, "but also angry. These people destroyed my life once. I'm not going to let them destroy anyone else's." The next morning brought a call from Special Agent Martinez that changed everything. "We found something in Volkov's personal file," she said. "He kept records of his payments to a larger criminal organization called the Silver Circle. They specialize exclusively in financial crimes against elderly victims and have been operating for over 15 years, stealing an estimated $200 million from seniors across the United States." "How many victims?" Dot asked. "At least 3,000 confirmed victims, possibly twice that." "Mrs. Sullivan, your case isn't just about getting your money back anymore. It's about exposing the largest elder fraud conspiracy in American history." That afternoon, as federal agents coordinated raids on Silver Circle operations in 12 states, Travis made a decision that would shock the sports world. "I'm retiring from football," he announced to his agent. "What?" "Travis, you're at the top of your game. And while I'm playing football, thousands of elderly people are losing their life savings to criminals who think they can operate with impunity." Travis looked at Dot, who was reviewing applications from other fraud victims. "I've found something more important than football. I've found a way to use my resources to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." The announcement sent shockwaves through the NFL and beyond. Travis Kelce, at the height of his career, was walking away from millions to dedicate himself full-time to fighting elder fraud. The Silver Circle had made a fatal mistake when they targeted Dot Sullivan. They'd assumed she was just another vulnerable elderly victim who would disappear quietly. Instead, they'd awakened a force they couldn't have anticipated. The combined power of a teacher's determination and a celebrity's resources united in a mission that would bring down one of the largest criminal enterprises in American history. 2 years after Travis Kelce walked away from football to fight elder fraud, he stood before a joint session of Congress, flanked by Dorothy Sullivan and the families of dozens of Silver Circle victims. The hearing room was packed with reporters, federal agents, and elderly Americans who had traveled from across the country to witness the most significant elder fraud prosecution in U.S. history. Congressman Martinez, Travis said, addressing the House Judiciary Committee chairman, "When I first met Mrs. Sullivan collecting aluminum cans to survive, I thought I was just helping one person. I had no idea we were about to expose a criminal conspiracy that has stolen over $400 million from American seniors." The investigation that began with Dot's case had mushroomed beyond imagination. The Dorothy Sullivan Foundation had received over 12,000 reports of suspected frauds first year alone, identifying 127 separate scammers operating under the Silver Circle umbrella. "Mrs. Sullivan," Congressman Martinez said, turning to Dot, "would you tell the committee about the scope of what you've uncovered?" Dot, now 77, but looking healthier and more vibrant than she had in years, leaned forward to the microphone. "Congressman, the Silver Circle wasn't just stealing money," she said. "They were destroying lives, systematically, intentionally, and with complete disregard for the human cost." She gestured to a wall-mounted display showing photographs of victims. Margaret Chen, 82, a retired nurse. Robert Williams, 79, a Vietnam veteran. Sarah Thompson, 85, a former librarian who ended up homeless after losing everything to a Silver Circle scammer. Travis watched as committee members wiped away tears. Dot had a gift for making abstract crimes personal and immediate. "What makes this particularly heinous," Travis added, "is that these weren't random crimes. The Silver Circle maintained databases of potential victims, complete with personal information and psychological profiles designed to identify the most vulnerable target. Special Agent Martinez presented evidence that shocked even experienced investigators. The Silver Circle operated like a corporation. They had training manuals for scammers, customer service protocols, and performance bonuses based on how much money individual fraudsters could steal per victim. The most damning evidence came from Marcus Volkov himself, who had cooperated with prosecutors. Through tears, he described the organization's deliberate targeting of elderly victims suffering from dementia, widows dealing with grief, and retirees facing medical crises. But the hearing's most powerful moment came when Travis announced what he called the unthinkable decision that had shocked the sports world. "Committee member, I want to announce that Mrs. Sullivan and I are donating $50 million to establish the National Elder Fraud Prevention Institute," Travis said. "This will be a permanent federal resource dedicated to investigating, prosecuting, and preventing crimes against elderly Americans." The room erupted in applause, but Travis wasn't finished. "Furthermore, we've reached an agreement with the Department of Justice to establish elder fraud courts in 25 major cities, specialized judicial programs designed to fast-track prosecution of crimes against seniors." The scope of Travis's commitment staggering. He had liquidated most of his personal investment and redirected his entire post-football income to fund the war against elder fraud. "Mr. Kelce," Congressman Williams asked, "you've essentially given up everything, your football career, your personal wealth, to fight financial crime. Why?" Travis looked at Dot, who nodded encouragingly. "Because I learned something from Mrs. Sullivan that no football game ever taught me. I learned that true victory isn't about what you accomplish for yourself. It's about what you make possible for others." He gestured toward the gallery, filled with fraud victims. "Every person in this room represents someone who was told by criminals that they didn't matter. Mrs. Sullivan taught me that when someone tells you that you don't matter, the only acceptable response is to prove them spectacularly wrong." The congressional hearing made national headlines, but the real impact was measured in concrete results. Within 6 months, the elder fraud courts had processed over 800 cases and recovered $23 million for victims. The National Elder Fraud Prevention Institute was providing training to law enforcement and maintaining a 24-hour line that received over 200 calls per day. "The thing that makes me proudest," Dot said during a 60 Minutes interview, "isn't that we got my money back, or even that we caught the criminal. It's that we've made it harder for anyone to dismiss elderly fraud victims as naive or foolish. The interviewer asked the question many viewers wondered about. Mrs. Sullivan, when you were collecting aluminum cans to survive, could you have imagined your story would lead to the largest elder fraud investigation in American history? Dot smiled with the expression she'd probably used with students asking difficult questions. I couldn't have imagined any of this, but I think that's the point. You never know, the worst thing that happens to you might become the foundation for the best thing you ever do. The most remarkable transformation was Travis himself. The man, once known primarily for athletic achievements, had become one of the country's most effective advocates for a vulnerable population. People ask me if I miss football, Travis said during his own 60-minute segment. I tell them that football taught me teamwork toward a common goal. Fighting elder fraud with Mrs. Sullivan has been the most important team I've ever been part of. The Dorothy Sullivan Foundation had grown into a nationwide organization with offices in 32 cities and over 200 staff members. They had helped recover over $180 million for fraud victims and trained more than 10,000 law enforcement officers. The most fitting tribute came when the Kansas City Chiefs announced they were retiring Travis's jersey number in honor of his commitment to protecting vulnerable members of our community. At the ceremony, Travis stood at midfield in Arrowhead Stadium with Dot beside him, both wearing Chiefs jerseys with his number 87. Mrs. Sullivan started this journey collecting aluminum cans to survive, Travis said, addressing 75,000 fans. Today, she's the executive director of the most successful elder fraud prevention organization in American history. That's not just a comeback story. That's proof that America still believes in justice. As fireworks exploded, and the crowd gave them a 10-minute standing ovation, Dot leaned over with tears in her eyes. When I was a teacher, I always told my students that education was about learning they had the power to change the world. Did you believe it then? Travis asked. I hoped it was true, Dot replied. Now I know it is. The ceremony concluded with the announcement that the stadium's new community outreach center would be named the Dorothy Sullivan Center for Elder Services. As they walked off the field together, the former NFL star and the retired teacher who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances both understood they had accomplished something that transcended sports, celebrity, or even justice. 3 years later, Marcus Volkov and 87 other Silver Circle members were serving federal prison sentences totaling over 600 years. The Dorothy Sullivan Foundation had helped recover over $300 million for fraud victims across the United States. The woman who had once been invisible, collecting cans in the shadows of Kansas City, had become the most visible advocate for elderly Americans in the country. And the man who had once been famous for catching football had become famous for something much more important: catching criminals and giving hope to people who thought they had none left. The aluminum cans that Dot had once collected to survive had become the foundation for a movement that would protect elderly Americans for generations to come. And Travis Kelce's decision to walk away from football had become proof that sometimes the greatest victories happen not when you score the touchdown, but when you help someone else reach the end zone. It was, by any measure, unthinkable, and it was perfect.